Our lecture here tonight, gang, is The Shape We're In, the history of the map of Ireland. We have Dr. Michael Keys here, and just before we go any further, just a little question for you all here tonight. Which is the smarter, longitude or latitude? What would you reckon?
What do you mean smarter?
Longitude has 360 degrees.
I can't compete with that, I'm sorry. So, okay, can you all hear me okay there? Yeah. I'm probably going to be standing at the wrong side of the microphone. We're still okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Michael Keys and I work here in the library, and just before I start, I want to point out that these are my babies over here on the left, on my left. So if you get a chance when we finish up, have a look. These are originals. So we're going to be talking about the history of the map of Ireland, and you won't come across anything older than what you see there. But we'll press on, and this is probably more familiar to all of us. This is the map that we all looked up to in our national schools, and I mean, I'm pretty old. This is the kind of one I remember. And but I think no matter how old any of us are, the map that we had in our school classrooms, it was always the same, and we always assumed that the shape of Ireland was this teddy bear shape that everybody's familiar with. And nowadays, of course, we can look at Google Maps and Google Earth and look down on Ireland and see the exact shape of Ireland. But you'd be surprised at how long it took cartographers to come and to find the true shape of Ireland. This evening I'm going to take you on a journey. Hopefully we'll look at the many shapes of Ireland and explore how colonisation, rebellion and retribution all contributed to the evolution of the shape of the map of Ireland. So let's go back to the very earliest map of Ireland, the earliest one that we have. Our Ireland is featured on world maps from the time of Claudius Ptolemy, the Greek, who lived in Rome and Alexandria. His famous Geographia dates from 150 AD. Ptolemy identified rivers, promontories, tribes, and some of the towns. Looking at the map, you can see that the position of Eblana, which I think it's over there somewhere, this would suggest that Eblana was the Roman name for Dublin back in 150 AD. And then down south you can see the river Birgos, which would be the Barrow. And also we have these names refer to tribes. This is the Brigantes. We don't know a whole pile about the Brigantes, but we can see from this map that the Brigantes were a Celtic tribe, and you can see that they also featured on the west coast of the neighbouring island. So in 150 AD, this is how Ptolemy portrayed Ireland, and we can see that there were connections between the two islands in terms of the Celtic tribes. Move on. This is Ptolemy's map of the known world. If you look at it, we can see America is missing, most of Africa, Australia and the poles, but Europe looks quite recognisable. And looking at Ptolemy's map, it's hard to believe that he could acquire the information that enabled him to create an image of the known world in the 2nd century. It's impressive to think that almost 2,000 years ago, somebody in Alexandria could point to a map and indicate where Ireland, or Hibernia as it was known then, was in relation to Europe and to Africa and Asia. And Ptolemy's achievement is even more impressive if we realise that no more detailed map than this was created for another 1,300 years. This is Ptolemy's map, still being used in Jacob d'Angelo's 1467 map. So, in 1467, they hadn't improved on Ptolemy, and it's what we might call a striking example of the lack of scientific progress over the period of the Dark Ages. So this we'll go during the Middle Ages. The greatest map-making achievement would have been the Mappa Mundi, and this is one of the better-known examples. This is called the Hereford Mappa Mundi, and that dates from 1285. Now, these would have been the product of church-based scholarship. You can see that it's based on the circular dish with Jerusalem at the centre, and if anything, it was less detailed than Ptolemy's. You can barely make out the Mediterranean in the centre. Now, this next one here. This is an example of the Mappa Mundi that appeared in a book called Topographia Hibernica. It was produced by Geraldus Cambrensis, or Gerald of Wales, as he was otherwise known. And he visited Ireland in 1185. Cambrensis wrote a rather unflattering account of the Irish and Ireland, and this was the map that appeared in that book. But you can see that it's just a simple outline with 4 rivers and 4 towns in it. And this, we have to remember, is 1,000 years after Ptolemy. So if we're to look for the development of accurate maps of Ireland and elsewhere, the real story begins after 1492, with Europe's discovery of the New World and the commencement of the age of exploration. Maps and sea charts were critical to those who set sail seeking exotic lands, gold, spices, and new trade routes. As a result, the first accurate outlines of coasts came from the accumulated data from mariners who charted courses from one port to another. That brings us to here. So these were known as Portolan charts. This one dates from 1492, and we can see how reasonably accurate the coastline, how a reasonably accurate coastline has been achieved by plotting the position of the ports along the coast. Ireland is still far from accurate, but you can see up here, this is Ireland and Great Britain. So we're beginning to see it take shape. So this is the first moves towards a new, more accurate mapping based on seafaring information. Portolan charts were providing increasingly detailed outlines of land masses, but what lay inland was somewhat unknown, and it was referred to on maps, as you can see here, as terra incognita. So, hand in hand with the exploration went conquest, and as European powers acquired new territories, they needed to survey and map them. It wasn't just in the New World that lands were being acquired and mapped. In the 1500s, Tudor monarchs from King Henry VIII to Elizabeth I struggled to gain control over Gaelic Ireland. And during that period, surveying and mapping tended to go hand in hand with rebellion and confiscation. The Tudor monarchy needed maps to see the extent of the land they sought to colonise, or at least to anglicise. Their military needed maps to defeat the Irish, who resisted that attempt, and maps were needed in order to distribute land taken from Irish rebels to be given to English settlers. Early Tudor mapping was associated with the plantation of Laois and Offaly. And following the confiscation of the land of the O'Moore and O'Connor clans, who had traditionally raided the English-ruled Pale around Dublin, Lord Deputy of Ireland, the Earl of Sussex, ordered that they be dispossessed and replaced with an English settlement. This is a map that was drawn up at the time, and it dates from 1556. It's painted on cloth. It shows the land, the woods, the terrain, which would impede English troops. It also gives the names of Irish inhabitants, and significantly, Laois and Offaly have been renamed Kings and Queens County. The two main forts were named Maryborough and Philipstown after Queen Mary and her husband. This map is a perfect example of the twofold use of early maps. Firstly, they were produced to assist the military in their efforts to subdue the territory. And beyond that very practical use, they were employed as documents that testified to the new order that prevailed. By producing impressive and a detailed map with English names and county divisions, it served to cement the conquest. The map became the title deed to the colonised land, so to speak. But still no proper map of the island had been completed. In 1567, John Gough completed a map of Ireland. But as we can see, his map left a lot to be desired in terms of detail and accuracy. However, we know that it was the best available at the time because it belonged to William Cecil, who was later Lord Burleigh, and he was Queen Elizabeth's chief advisor in relation to Ireland. And the reason we know that it was his because we can still see his notes that he made on the map down in the left-hand corner here. So this would have been the best map available in 1567. And not surprisingly, in that same year, an attempt was made at producing what they termed to be a perfect map of the whole realm. And Robert Lyde, who was a military engineer, was commissioned to conduct a survey and produce the map. Lyde began in the north, but he made little progress. He mapped Carrickfergus, but little else, being unable to penetrate the hostile lands of Ulster. He left for England, but returned to the north the following year. Once again, he failed to make much headway in Ulster due to its continued unquietness, quote unquote. Lyde turned his attention to the more peaceful lands in the south, where his achievements between 1568 and 1570 were impressive. With the exceptions of the lordships of Ormond and Ely O'Carroll, he mapped all of the country south of the line from Killary Harbour to Strangford Lough. In 1571, Lyde submitted his bill for his map of Ireland. Unfortunately, his plat, as he referred to it, has not survived. But we do have a copy of the detailed bill which lists costs, including the hire of guides and boats. For example, here we have item from Kinsale with boat to Oysterhaven and the islands, and so to the head of Kinsale, 10 shillings. Now, whilst much of Lyde's work has been lost, enough remains of his work to identify him as the well from which sprung a stream of derivative maps. By the late 1580s, manuscript versions of his work were circulating in London and were to become the primary source for Mercator's Irlandia Regnum, which appeared in his 1595 atlas. So this would have been based on the survey work of Robert Lyde. Lyde was also the principal source for Baptista Boasio's 1599 map. This is the one you see just immediately to the right of the screen. And while I'm biased, I would regard this as possibly the most attractive map of Ireland that was ever made. Boasio himself claimed that it was diligently collected and partly surveyed. But in his book, Shapes of Ireland, J.H. Andrews places the emphasis firmly on collected and dismissively suggests that Irlande serves only as an inadequate medium through which we can view the work of Robert Lyde. If we look at Irlande in that light, it becomes clear that the southern three provinces Lyde succeeded in transforming the map of Ireland. The ungainly appearance of Ulster, which was the area that Lyde did not survey, serves to underline his achievement in the area that he did survey. So we can see that Munster, Leinster, to a lesser degree Connacht, are beginning to look a bit more recognisable, while Ulster and the west coast of Connacht are far from accurate. And that kind of reflects the situation on the ground at the time, because the north was still an area that British rule had not penetrated into. Now, although Andrews was quick to dismiss Boasio, it has to be acknowledged that Irlanda proved to be very popular. Boasio was an artist by profession, and he may have understood something about the wider appeal of maps. The image he borrowed from Lyde, the military engineer, has been coloured, decorated, accessorised with ships, sea monsters. There's even an Eskimo in his kayak off the Mayo coast. So, and Boazio was mischievous enough to include two entirely fictional islands. Baptista's Rock and Elstrake's Isle were named after his engraver and himself. The eye tends to be drawn to these titivations and distracted from the less than accurate coastline details. So Boazio, being the artist, produced a wonderfully attractive map, and the features distracted from the fact that it was far from accurate. Now, it might be said that Boazio's map was 2/3 Lyde and 1/3 out of date. While our next map, John Speed's 1610 map, this would have been, might be termed to have been 2/3 Lyde and 1/3 updated. Speed based his map on those of Boazio and Mercator, but he improved on them by using the work of other intrepid Elizabethan surveyors who had braved and unsubdued Ireland. One such, Richard Bartlett, came close to completing surveys of the few remaining uncharted regions. His death at the hands of the Irish as he surveyed Donegal served to underline how difficult it had been to survey the remoter parts of Ireland in the 16th century. Speed was not to benefit from the work of Bartlett, but he drew on other surveys that were the product of the Elizabethan campaign in Ireland. In 1590, Francis Jobson succeeded where Lyde had failed and produced a survey of Ulster. It was an area that Jobson recalled as being inhabited with a most savage and rebellious people, from whose cruelty at that time God only by his divine power delivered me, being in every hour in danger to lose my head. Well, he probably realised Richard Bartlett had lost his head. So, now, with the benefit of Jobson's work, as well as access to a coastline survey of Donegal, Speed was able to improve greatly on the outline of the Ulster coast. He does less well on the west coast, repeating Lyde's rather stunted Connemara coastline. It would appear that he didn't have access to a survey of Connacht completed in 1591 by John Brown and his nephew of the same name, but due most likely to the fact that it was never actually published. Speed therefore did not confine himself to Lyde or his derivatives, and though he took his material from others, he was not a mere copyist. His selections were discerning and considered. He chose to follow Lyde in some areas and favoured other sources where he believed they were more accurate. He was not happy to take the most recent material and just add decorative appeal. He took a range of sources and combined them to produce a map that brought together the best that was available. Then, with an eye to the aesthetic, he had the maps engraved in Amsterdam by Hondius. The result was a map that was attractive, but also improved geographically on what went before. The 16th century came to a close with the 9 Years' War. O'Neill and O'Donnell's defeat at Kinsale in 1601, the Treaty of Mellifont in 1603, and the flight of the Earls in 1607 signalled the end of Gaelic Ireland. It was a conclusion of a struggle that had caused surveys to be made, and the resulting maps were a reflection of the progress of that Elizabethan conquest. Robert Lyde's survey at the end of the 1560s, as seen in Boazio's 1599 map, is evidence of the failure to control the northwest, while Speed's 1610 maps reflect the changing military and political situation with its improved mapping of Ulster. It should not come as much of a surprise then that the next major advance in mapping of Ireland would come in the wake of the next major outbreak of hostilities. In the meantime, new maps of Ireland would continue to appear, but they were not based on new surveys, but on the best available maps already in existence. At the turn of the century, John Speed's 1610 map was the best and most accurate map of Ireland, and this was the basis for the map that appeared in William Blau's Atlas Major in 1662. Blau's representation of Ireland was just a more attractive interpretation of Speed's map. if you were to look closely, you'd see that this map is essentially the previous map, copied and reproduced in a more attractive manner by William Blaeu. Now, not alone is this a beautiful map in its own right, but it was contained in a set of 12 volumes containing approximately 600 maps and 300 pages of text. Such was the measure of his achievement that when it was published in 1662, the Atlas became the most expensive book in the world. The Atlas was a crowning achievement of 2 generations of cartographers, and it marked the high watermark of the golden age of Dutch cartography. Now, cartographic progress in post-1630 Amsterdam was frenetic, but it was progress born out of intense rivalry. The impression is more of a commercial competition than of scientific advance. In the absence of copyright, maps of greater geographical accuracy provided no great advantage over one's rivals, and they could be immediately adopted by the opposition. Competition was based in the main on increasing the volume of maps contained in succeeding publications, but also in the area of design, decoration, quality engraving and production values. And as Charles Bricker commented on it, it put the cartouche in competition with the continent. So this is more of the emphasis on quality and appearance, aesthetic appearance. The ever-growing capacity of the Dutch printing houses required a supply of cartographic raw material to feed them. Blaeu had close connections with the Dutch East India Company and had also developed and maintained correspondence with a range of sources abroad. And of course, they were not averse to direct plagiarism. It was from this latter source that Blaeu acquired his maps of Ireland. They were all copied from Jansonius, and he in turn had copied them from Speed's Atlas, Theatre of Great Britain. Nor was Blaeu a Speed who marshalled a variety of sources to ensure the elements he included were the most up-to-date. Blaeu followed Boasio, choosing to use a single source and use only art and embellishment to improve on it. Blaeu may well stand indicted of producing a map which by 1662 was based on 84-year-old survey data. However, short of conducting his own survey, which was not the way he operated, he did manage to use the best map of Ireland that was available at the time, there not having been any major surveys conducted since Lives in 1570. Now, this deficiency in survey material was soon to be remedied. Once again, Ireland's rebellious colonial history was to provide the spur for cartographic advances. That spur was to be the 1641 rebellion, and it gave rise to what became known as the Down Survey. In 1641, a rebellion erupted in Ulster and quickly spread through Ireland. In 1642, the English Civil War intervened, and it was not until 1649 that Oliver Cromwell could devote himself to suppressing the rebels in Ireland. It had been determined as early as 1642 that the Irish campaign would be largely self-funding by way of an arrangement that reminds us of modern-day public-private partnerships. Investors in London put up money for the campaign, and they were to get a return on their investment by way of grants of land in Ireland. Before the spoils could be divided, a survey of the forfeited lands needed to be conducted, and this was commenced in 1652 under Benjamin Worsley, Surveyor General. William Petty, who held the post of physician to the army in Ireland, held Worsley in low regard. Questioning his scientific credentials, he wrote once that he carries with him some magnifying glasses through which he shows au esprit mediocre his skill in several arts. Petty questioned his methods and put forward his own proposals for conducting the survey. Petty's more efficient and cheaper methods were adopted, and he took over the survey from 1654. Petty didn't introduce any major innovations in the area of surveying. In fact, his methods were rather crude. He admitted as much when he said that he used only, quote, a little better contrivance and method, and a little more diligence and assiduity than my predecessors. His genius was for organisation. He broke the project down into its constituent tasks and ensured that his more valued staff were not assigned to menial tasks. An example of his practical efficiency was the use of 1,000 soldiers as field workers. They were men more suited to traversing difficult and dangerous terrain, and who cost less than surveyors. The survey proper was intended to cover only the forfeited lands, and has for that reason been said to have produced what was essentially an atlas of Catholic Ireland. However, maps of nearly all the baronies in the counties were prepared, as well as detailed parish maps for the forfeited lands. And Petty himself tells us how he had measured 22 counties in 13 months' time, with chain and instrument. It actually took closer to 3 years to complete the survey. And while it was not the most comprehensive, while it was the most comprehensive undertaken since Lyde's survey in 1568, it still wasn't a complete survey of Ireland. Petty too was forced to use the work of others before he could produce a map of Ireland, with the addition of material from the Stafford Survey of Connacht, which was conducted in 1636 by William Gilbert. Petty had the means to produce his atlas, Hibernia Delineato, which included maps of the counties, the provinces, as well as his general map. This is Petty's general map of Ireland. One is immediately struck by how close the outline of Ireland comes to reality, and it's probably fair to say that in Petty's map, Ireland had for the first time achieved its true shape. It was a great achievement, given that it was produced by effectively stitching together the individual barony maps to create the general map, a process that ran contrary to the basics of cartography, whereby progression should be from the large area to the small. But nonetheless, it is quite impressive, and one is happy to see that an accurate outline had been achieved. But this was 1685. We need only look at a comparative sample of the West Coast to see how Petty leaves Blow trailing in his wake in terms of accuracy. It's as if the land previously inundated by the Atlantic had been miraculously reclaimed by Petty. You see here. The lakes of Mayo and Galway have been reduced to normal proportions. The Aran Islands have become 3 instead of 2. And the Shannon, which was partially closed by Lyde, has been reopened by Petty. Blau's map had passed its sell-by date, so to speak, while Petty's was fresh and modern. Petty had produced an image that would not be bettered under the scientific methods of the Ordnance Survey in the 19th century. But that's not to say that Petty's map wasn't without its deficiencies. The map is uneven in detail, with blank areas where no land was forfeited. The size and styles of the script used make it difficult to determine the hierarchy of towns, and he reverts to diagrammatic settlement symbols, which are confusing in their variety and they lack a key. Coastal names are appended at a jaunty angle to the land, giving the map an untidy appearance, and relief features are crudely depicted, with their placement seeming almost arbitrary. It's in the area that Blow excelled that Petty's map was found most wanting. That is in the matter of final production. Blow cannot compete in terms of geographic accuracy, but just about every other aspect of the finished product seems more attractive and more polished and professional. In Petty's map, the engraving is of poor quality, and as J.H. Andrews so eloquently puts it, its cartouches, though up-to-date in decorative style, are unnecessarily elaborate, clumsily executed, and without allegorical point, satisfying neither the mind nor the eye with their frozen-faced marine creatures and wizened little cherubs. So he didn't think a lot of his efforts. But to compare Blau's map of Ireland to Petty's general map is to enter the area of defining cartography itself. It begs the question, what defines good and bad in map making? If one takes a technical scientific approach, it's clear that a map is intended to represent a spatial entity in diagrammatic form, and the more accurate the representation, the better the map. From this point of view, there's little to commend the work of Blau and his ilk. It may well be the view of J.H. Andrews, whose only reference to Blau's contribution to the maps of Ireland is to accuse him of, quote, heavy-handed editing of Speed's map. It's perhaps too narrow a viewpoint, too pure a definition of cartography, because one man's heavy-handed editing can be another man's fine art. The printing press had meant that maps could be reproduced in multiple copies, and from the moment Ortelius created the first atlas, cartography changed forever. Maps had primarily been technical tools of government in the era of manuscript maps, but with the atlas, maps became a commodity to be valued for themselves, for their appearance as much for their technical content. Blaeu had moved on from issues of mere function, realizing that maps had an aesthetic appeal. He took the scientific and made it artistic. He and publishers like him took the map out of the chambers of the government and brought them into people's homes. It was this commodifying of maps and the commercialization of cartography that gave rise to the golden age of Dutch map making. Maps became status symbols. They were hung on walls, and as atlases they graced the bookcases of the elite of Europe, in a manner not unlike Worsley's use of magnifying glasses, we can assume. The image that Blaeu disseminated also benefited from the fact that he wasn't English. He dispensed with the symbolism of the conquered land employed by Speed, removing the patronising images of wild and civil Irish and the warships patrolling Lough Neagh. These would have been features of Speed's map of Ireland. You can see the wild and civil Irish, and in the middle of Lough Neagh there you had a British warship patrolling it, underlining the fact that it was now under British control. Blau's map owed its existence to purely commercial factors, while Petty's owed its origin to the Down Survey, which of course was a tool of government. The government did not, however, require that Petty that he publish an atlas as part of the survey, and he showed that he wasn't immune to the lure of commerce when he invested £1,000 of his own money in having the work engraved. Hibernia Delineata was no less an exercise in the packaging and selling of the cartographic image than was Blau's Atlas Major. The shame was the one with the up-to-date, accurate information was poorly presented, while the map that was exquisitely designed and produced lacked accurate information. A truly great map would have been a combination of both. It's probably safe to say that with William Petty's Hibernia Delineato, Ireland had at last found its true shape, but as far as detailed and accurate mapping of the interior was concerned, there was still a lot of work to be done. The two great leaps forward in mapping in Ireland had been during the Elizabethan period in the second half of the 1500s, and then again during the land confiscations that followed the 1641 rebellion. The 1700s would see some very fine maps of Ireland produced, but none were based on a complete survey. Of the more notable efforts, we might mention Henry Pratt's Tabula Hiberniae Novissima e Emendatissima from 1708. Pratt can be said to have updated Petty's map, making it more coherent, and he added detail by way of towns, barracks, roads, and other information here at the base. Then we have the next one, John Roke, who was responsible for the lovely map, the lovely 1759 map of Dublin that we would be familiar with from once featured on the £10 note. Roke also produced a map of the Kingdom of Ireland. Again, he took his outline from Pratt's 1708 map and some of the detail from Petty. Then a slight variation. In 1778 saw the production of Taylor and Skinner's maps of the roads of Ireland, which was a more practical and useful map than any others of the period. Taylor and Skinner's road map was a commercial venture. They made a point of including the houses of the gentry along the routes of their maps. This, of course, was done with an eye to sales, the assumption being that if their country pile featured in the book, the gentry were likely to buy a copy of it. So, then in 1792, Daniel Augustus Beaufort from Navan, who was the father of Francis, famous for giving his name to the Beaufort scale, he produced a new map of Ireland, as he termed it, but of course it wasn't new at all. In the memoir that accompanied the map, he admitted as much by saying, quote, "A perfectly correct map cannot be expected until every county has been completely surveyed. So this is at the very latter end of the 1700s, and still we had no survey. As we move on to the 19th century, it's been over 150 years since William Petty's Down survey, and still we have no new survey. Ireland had become part of the United Kingdom with the Act of Union in 1800, and in the spirit of the Enlightenment and the Age of Reform, there was an impetus to map, measure and manage Ireland, and indeed everywhere else as well. Enlightenment thinking in Britain saw encyclopedic scientific knowledge as a means to provide rationalist solutions to the problems of the world, and maps played an important part in providing that knowledge. Modern, detailed, scientific and standardised maps would help administrators to read, regulate and reform the land. The exercise in scientific mapping began in England in the 1790s under the Board of Ordnance, the military body responsible for mapping. In the early decades of the 1800s, the Irish landowners began to lobby Westminster for a national survey and valuation of land on the grounds that taxation was based on a system that was inaccurate, inequitable and corrupt. In response, a government report in 1824 recommended that the Ordnance Survey be extended to Ireland. Colonel Thomas Colby, who was director of the Ordnance Survey, was tasked with the Irish undertaking. Now, the scale of what was envisaged reflected the confidence and can-do attitude of a British Empire that had emerged victorious from the Napoleonic Wars. The new map was to be produced at a scale of 6 inches to 1 mile, greater than anything that had gone before. It would represent counties, baronies, right down to the level of Ireland's 60,000 townlands. A separate department was set up under Richard Griffith, a prominent Irish geologist, to conduct a boundary and valuation survey. Between them, every inch, acre, house and plot was to be mapped, measured, recorded and valued. And beyond that, there were even more ambitious plans. Colby believed that a new map would provide the basis for statistical, antiquarian and geological surveys. A geological and statistical office was set up in Belfast, together with a laboratory for the examination of soils. Detailed instructions were drawn up for the officers in the field in what became known as Colby's Blue Book. They were to pay attention to, quote, the social condition and habits of the people, to antiquities and traditionary recollections of all kinds, or to natural history in all its branches. To carry out this monumental task, Colby assembled an elite corps of officers from the Royal Engineers and Royal Artillery, 3 companies of soldiers known as sappers and miners, as well as labourers and specialist staff recruited locally, 2,000 in all. Work commenced in 1825, and starting from a baseline in County Derry, the shape of the entire island was accurately determined using a series of triangulation stations. These stations were high points in the landscape that had direct line of sight to other stations. This is a contemporary drawing of the measurement of the Lough Foyle baseline. This was a very, very precise and scientific exercise, and conducted undercover to minimise the fluctuations in temperature and avoiding rain. So once they had a very precisely measured baseline, then they could extend out the lines and by means of triangulation get precise measurements of the entire country. So within the triangles thus created, the Ordnance Survey officers worked with theodolites, and then the finer measurements were made using chain lines. These would have been, so they literally stretched out chains across the land and measured the smaller detail. In 1828, Captain Thomas Larkham was appointed local director of the Ordnance Survey in Ireland. Larkham took Colby's Blue Book to another level. He set out to compile memoirs, books of detailed local information to accompany the maps. He employed Irish scholars to traverse the country that would research the background to place names and determine the most correct version. The best known of the scholars was John O'Donovan, who was initially appointed by Larkham to teach him Irish, but who went on to be one of the more zealous and accomplished of the scholars associated with the memoir compilation. Unfortunately, this aspect of the Ordnance Survey proved to be a little ambitious. Memoirs were compiled for the counties in the north before the idea was abandoned. The efforts of John O'Donovan and the Ordnance Survey to put names on Irish places that sounded right to an English ear was to inspire the play Translations by Brian Friel. And despite the suspension of the memoir project, we do still have what would be referred to as the Ordnance Survey letter books. And these were records that the surveyors and the scholars produced as they traversed the land, trying to determine the history of the names of the places around the country. And these are actually available online now. So for the northern counties you have the memoir books, but for the rest of the country, for nearly all of the rest of the country, we do have access to the notebooks that were created at the time the Ordnance Survey was being conducted. Now, despite the fact that the memoir project wasn't completed, the map created by the Ordnance Survey between 1824 and 1842 was a major achievement. It was scientific, accurate and comprehensive, and it was to provide the basis of all the maps that followed almost to the present day. The map provided the basis for Griffith's valuation, which would put a value on every plot and property in the country, and located it on the map. And it was the Ordnance Survey map that made it possible to conduct the first successful census in 1841. Inspired by the success of the Ordnance Survey mapping of Ireland, they went on to map India. So not only had Ireland found its true shape, but with the Ordnance Survey, it had also revealed its innermost details. Thank you, folks. That's a quick run through the shape of Ireland. No, that would have been John Rooke's 1759 map of Dublin.
But it's remarkably accurate.
Oh yeah, it was a lovely. It's a beautiful map. It's a beautiful map.
The St. James's Street, the St. Kevin Street, and the rest of it are there today with possibly minor changes.
Oh no, it's a very attractive map.
Yeah.
He did a detailed map of Dublin, and then he did one of the county of Dublin, which we have on our website, and it's very interesting because you can compare it to the modern and go back to 1760.
If you take the earlier maps of the coastline of Ireland, take sort of the southwest with the various inlets around Kerry and Limerick, how were those? Were they measured by chaining off length of land, or was it a certain amount of speculation as well?
There was a huge amount of speculation, because you can imagine, we had a little reference there to Robert Lyde travelling by boat around the old head of Kinsale. You know, you can imagine that there was very little scientific means available to him. They would have had, even the earliest surveyors would have had a basic form of theodolite. So they could take angles off of high points in the land. So the principle, I'm no cartographer, but the principle being that if you know the accurate length of this piece, so this piece here, if you take a line to there and a line from there, then you can measure those two lines. It's basically basic geometry. So they could have done that, you know, that if they measured a piece on land and then triangulated that to high points in the area, they could get their measurements. But the real hazard, or the real impediment to accurate mapping, was the political state of the country. And you keep coming up against, there was huge pressure in the 1500s to get accurate maps because the Elizabethan conquest was underway, and for that very reason, they were anybody who tried to map Ulster was seen for what they were, agents of the enemy. You know. Sorry.
And if they weren't able to do scientific surveys, as you say, until quite late, 1817, 1800.
Mm.
How early were they able to do them in what was then England and Wales, and were there similar problems in Scotland?
They didn't produce anything exceptional in England either. The Ordnance Survey project only commenced in England in the 1790s, which was about 20 or 30 years before it was extended to Ireland. So before that, they wouldn't have had anything, exceptional either. Obviously, the most of Great Britain would have been mapped reasonably accurately long before certainly the northern part of Ireland, and the same thing would apply to Scotland. I presume that that it was probably that bit later before they surveyed it. But no, there was no really scientific mapping done until the Ordnance Survey. It was the age of enlightenment, it was the age of reason, and it was a time when the British wanted to create sort of encyclopedic knowledge of every aspect of the country, and then extend that to the colonies. And they use Ireland to a certain extent as a kind of a testing ground. If what they were able to do in Ireland, they subsequently expanded out into the colonies.
Isn't it amazing that Griffith, a lot of people now are using his valuation
It's fantastic.
to find their ancestors, because it was so detailed. It gave all where the people lived and everything.
And it's tricky enough to do it, but if you look at Griffith's valuation, every plot and every house in the country is listed with its acreage and its value, and then in the first column there's a little letter and a number which identifies where it's on the map. So you go to the map, you can find every house and every piece of ground. So if you know where your ancestors lived, you can find their farm and you can see how many acres they had. And it's incredible. Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Michael, comment first. The gentleman in front of you mentioned that some of the maps of Dublin City, the White Street Commission maps are fantastically accurate maps of how Dublin evolved at that period. But I have two questions. One is, people were sailing to Ireland from Mesolithic times. They knew how to navigate, they knew how to get from A to B. And then from the period of the early church, they went to Rome, they went on pilgrimages, they went around Europe. Are there any maps done by Irish people at that time? Did we have an Irish cartographer as such? And my second question, from Henry VIII's time when they were doing maps of Ireland, how did they handle Irish place names in Irish? No, they're low.
Okay, yeah, there's a few questions. We'll go back. Let's see. Go back to Mesolithic times. Yes, it is it's incredible. I'm only an enthusiastic amateur. I just love looking at maps, and I particularly like looking at the older ones, the less accurate and more attractive ones. But it came as quite a shock when I was doing this bit of research to go back and I said, hold on, there's nothing between 150 AD and 1492. It's the Dark Ages. And I said, it really kind of illustrates that. There is no, like I showed you the Hereford, and that was the kind of level of mapping that was available to the pilgrims. And I mean, we mustn't think that they were when we say the Dark Ages, they were the Dark Ages in terms of reversal and a loss of a lot of scholarship, scientific knowledge, and information. But people did travel. People were traveling all over Europe, but they certainly don't appear to have that map. And I'm not aware of any maps that were created in Ireland. I showed you the one that was created in 1185. That was Gerald Cambrensis, but that's just literally a Mappamundi, which has Ireland pressed up against the rim, about to fall off the earth. Oh yeah, sorry. What was the other question?
How did it handle Irish and Irish place names?
Oh, it did handle them very badly. The Ordnance Survey tried to do it. As they went to great lengths to determine what the correct place names were. But in the earlier maps, you can have a look. If you look at the map there, we have original examples here. And if you look at the place names, you'll recognise some of them. And some of them are exactly the same name, or spelled exactly as they are now. But you'll find that most of them are, the spelling is skewed. That, you might just recognise it because, oh, that's such and such a place. But they'll have spelled it wrong, and you can be sure they pronounced it wrong as well. But it was just...
the local didn't want them to get it right.
Yeah, certainly not in some parts of the but it would have been... These people traversed the country. Robert Lyde was the hero of... They were able to look at one of those maps, whatever part of the Roman Empire they were in, and they said, well, there's Gaul, and there's Ireland, and there's Alexandria. And it was incredibly accurate for 2,000 years ago. It shows you how impressive. But of course, the Romans inherited from the Greeks, like the best story I ever remember from studying cartography was, I think it was Eratosthenes, who was one of the early Greek geographers, and he figured out a way of measuring the circumference of the Earth using an ox and a cart and a stick down a well. Incredible. He stuck a pole into a well in his hometown, which I forget the name of the town. Then he went to the next town, whatever distance it was, and he stuck the stick down the well there. And he measured the angle of the sun made by the stick in the two places, and he worked out that there was 2 degrees of a difference in the angle. Well, he knew that a circle was 360 degrees, so he knew that from here to here, that's 2 degrees. So he tied a rag to the wheel of his cart. He got on the cart and he travelled from one town to the other, counting the bumps as he went. And he said, that's 100 miles.
Oh.
So if 2 degrees is 100 miles, multiply it by 180, and that's the circumference of the Earth. And he was only out by a couple of hundred, I don't know. He did it. He was right. So I kind of said, wow, these are the. So this was the kind of scientific thinking that was going on back in Alexandria, over 2,000 years ago, and it is incredible that they seem to learn and to find out so much, and then it all just went into abeyance until the Renaissance, basically.
But Michael, they had a very good library, like here. They had a very good library.
They did, but someone burnt it. Yeah.
Just going back to Petty's map, just how detailed did you say that was? Did it go down to townlands?
It's
down to roads?
Yeah, it's very interesting. it's quite detailed in some areas and not so detailed in other areas. Like I said, he had to conduct a very accurate survey in the areas that were being forfeited to the Crown. So basically, all the Catholic lands were being seized. So he has detailed those parishes quite well. But then there are areas where there was no land being seized, so there was no detail hardly at all in those. No, Petty's great achievement was finding the true shape of Ireland. His outline of the map of Ireland is as well. We know by looking at what we've seen here today.
But that would suggest that at local level he was quite accurate.
He did the outline of the baronies. He filled in a bit of detail in terms of places and land, but the actual detail on the map, the interior of the map, not an awful lot of terribly detailed information. He got the outline right, and it wasn't until the Ordnance Survey came along that you got the interior filled in.
And what sort of instruments would he have been using?
I quoted the chain and instrument. And the chain and instrument was literally a chain.
Yeah.
I showed you a picture. It would have been the chain I showed you would have been used by the Ordnance Survey. Petty's people would have had something similar, and the instrument would have been an earlier form of theodolite.
So
and angles, measurements.
Was there a compass used at that time?
You basically you figured out a triangle. You know one side, the measurement of one side. Then calculate the other two sides, and then you go on and then you take that one as your baseline, and you do another triangle. And so you just literally work out from your baseline. You create a triangle, and then you create another triangle off of that, then another triangle off of that, and another, and you just triangulate your way across. So the obviously the compass you need to measure the angles. So once you can measure the angles, then you can calculate the distance.
And is the Google map?
I should never mention Google.
Yeah.
Sorry, I meant to do that.
Yeah.
Google Maps.
It's the map that you have of Ireland and the Google map. Is there much difference in it?
When you say the one that I have, which
The
Ordnance Survey.
the last one, the 18 something or other.
Oh, the Ordnance Survey.
Yeah.
Oh no, but the Ordnance Survey is hugely accurate. Because they measured farmyards, fields, roads down to a very fine detail. But I mean, Google Maps is a fantastic phenomenon, but it is based on completely new technology, satellite imaging. Even the Ordnance Survey gave up the old style of surveying for they started using aerial photographs, so that they were able to actually they were probably able to increase their accuracy just from that. And then Google Maps is it takes it on to the next level. So you're using satellite imagery, still kind of.
But did it change the shape of Ireland?
No. Like I said, I kind of felt that you could have stopped at Petty because that's when Ireland found its shape. But it didn't, as I said at the finish, its innermost details did not become clear until 1842, the Ordnance Survey.
Is that when it was published?
It was finished in 1842, yeah.
It would appear from what you've been saying that the basic instruments were the surveyor's chain, which had ties on it at every metre.
What is it?
And the compass to determine the angles, and the basic primitive theodolite.
Yeah.
And between all of those and a knowledge of geometry, you could actually measure.
That's it. Yeah. And that, as I said, I'm not an expert, but that was the basic approach right through from the early days.
It's interesting if you walk in the mountains that you will see the primary triangulation stations are still there. I think it might have been touched up at some stage since the formation of this state, but they're still there, and apparently they used to light fires between one hilltop and another, and they were able to take the at night time they're able to get an accurate fix with the theodolite to get an angle. And if you go up to Hellfire Club, you'll find one up there.
Oh yeah, but yeah, all that map I showed you with all the triangles. Each point there would have been a triangulation station, which if you do go to that top of that mountain, it's still there, with the a little concrete mound with a symbol on it, and
WD War Department.
Yeah. And you have even on another level, you have on buildings around the city, you'll sometimes come across the what looks like a three-legged stool.
Benchmark.
Crow's foot, yeah. So they're ordnance survey height measurements. So.
The Americans had to do this because they were able to square off large areas when they're showing the boundaries between one side and the next.
Oh yes, well the Americans look like they use a ruler rather than a triangle to create their state. Yeah. So are we okay?
Thanks very much, Michael. Most enjoyable altogether. Really, really fantastic. To think all that way back, you had people talking about the Ablana Theatre in Alexandria. It was unbelievable.
Yes,
all that time ago. I find it so great wow factor there. Yes, most certainly could.
Yeah, I noticed like the area maps refer to Hibernia, which is the Romans and Greece called it. At what stage did who start calling our island Ireland? Was it the British were the first to call it Ireland, and when? Do you know?
Actually, that's a good question. It was Ireland, even on all of these maps, it's some variation on Irlande or whatever. The Romans called it Hibernia.
Too cold for them, isn't that the reason?
Yes, it was, winter. Hibernia, winter. But,
Wasn't
that's a very good question. I'm going to have to go on.
Was it not something from the gods? The Eru, the god of one of the gods, the old gods. Like Eru was a god of Ireland.
But that came out of the Lower Goala.
Yeah, but it must have been based on something that our early ancestors used. But it definitely, as far back as I can remember references in history, it was Ireland.
Is it not Eru land? Do you know, like?
It could be based on the word Eru.
Yeah.
I think it's got to do with, like, there was Bamba, there was Era, and there was something else.
Fola.
Yeah, so I think they must have picked Era.
It's definitely the name that it was given, certainly from sort of from Norman times anyway.
Breeze that's out there the last few nights is no wonder the Romans didn't come to us with them little short skirts. That's why the Irish and the Scots always wore them kilts down to their knee and just beyond. Thanks very much, Michael. Most enjoyable. I think it was a great lecture, folks. What do you think? To remind you, folks, switch your phones back off silent if you put them on. And let's see, December the 13th, Tuesday, the Leo Swan Memorial Lecture. Don't be there or be square. Don't forget about it. It's tea, biscuits and little cakes here for on the night. As I said, we have that chap, Neil Jackman, the archaeologist from the recent dig of the Hellfire Club. So it should be a really great night. God bless, safe home, safe journey. Donation box at the back of the hall there for anybody. Thank you very much.